3b, right smack in the middle. So we had a contradiction between two statements of Rav Shimon, and we're on our third answer. The first answer we had was when your actions are so clearly going against your invalid thought, then the offering is going to be valid. When your actions are not so clearly going against your thoughts, then that's not going to be valid. That was Rava. Yes, that was Rava, sorry. Yesterday we had Rava, who told us that it depends if you're doing it for another mincha, another flower offering, or for an animal offering. For a flower offering, it said those Torah mincha, they're all one category of flower offerings, and therefore that's valid. And now we're going to have a third answer. Rav Ashi Amar Lo Kasha. The two statements of Rav Shimon are not difficult. Why? Kan bekometz machabas l'shum marcheshes, and kan bekometz minchas machabas l'shum minchas marcheshes. So we have these different pans, right? We have a regular pan and a frying pan. So when you just say, when you want to have a sacrifice, a flower offering in a regular pan, and you go, no, I want it to be in a frying pan. Well, having in mind a different pan is nothing. That's like saying, I want to have it in mind, for bunnies. It's nothing. It doesn't mean anything. If you have in mind for a deep frying flour offering, that's going to be invalid. So that's what it means when you have a machabos, a regular pan offering, with shum marcheshes, and you say, I want to bring this in a frying pan instead of a regular pan. The fact that you mention a different pan is not going to be enough to invalidate. We don't take that statement seriously. But if you add the word mincha, you have in mind not a different pan, a different flour offering, which is going to be a deep fry flour offering, well, then now you're switching from one flour offering. You're having in mind a different deep pan flour offering. That's going to be invalid. The difference is, are you stating that you want it to be a different kind of flour offering or just a different vessel? Just having in mind a different vessel is not going to invalidate according to Rav Ashi, according to Rav Shimon. So, kan bekometz machabas l'shum marcheshes, and kan bekometz minchas machabas l'shum minchas marcheshes. Okay, machabas l'shum marcheshes, one pan to a frying pan, b'mana k'mechashev, u'machshav b'mana lo pasla. You just had in mind a different vessel. Having in mind different vessels is not an invalidation. So minchas machabas l'shum minchas marcheshes, but a flour offering of a pan offering, and then you have in mind for a flour offering of a deeper pan offering. So that b'mincha depasel b'machshava kamachashev, that you're going to that's going to invalidate when you have in mind a different flour offering. Okay, so now just a few technical questions on this reconciliation of Rav Ashi. The Brisa seemed to say that the reason is because your actions show us what your intention is. So how does that fit with Rav Ashi? Even if your actions are showing what you want, even if you continue to put it into a regular pan, even though you've verbalized very clearly that you want it to be in a deep pan, doesn't matter. It's still going to be invalid. Another part of that Brisa said, "Umay aval bezvachim einokin." What does it mean that by regular offerings, by animal offerings, it's not similar? What it means is, it's one shchita for all the animals, and zrika achas l'kulan, it's one zrika for all the animals. Kabbalah achas l'kulan is one accepting of the blood for all the animals. Still, even though it's one thing, there's no two forms of shchita. It's one kind of shchita, one kind of accepting the blood. So, bezvicha the possible makshava kamachashev. Still, by a animal that you slaughter, your thought process is going to invalidate. Okay. Now, on this reconciliation of Rav Ashi, Rav Acha has a question. I'm going to Rav Acha Breder Rava. Rav Acha, the son of Rava, asks Rav Ashi the following question. Some flour offerings, there's one of them that's called charva. It means it's dry. And other offerings, such as voluntary flour offerings, you put oil inside. So let's say you have a flour offering which is supposed to be dry. You have in mind that it's going to be mixed with oil. Does that invalidate? So, charva mishum belula, amai amar Reb Shimon, amai. So, such an offering here, there's no vessel. You're not having in mind a different vessel. You're having in mind that you're going to take a dry offering and you're going to mix it with oil. So shouldn't that be something which invalidates? Because it sounds like he's understanding that the whole reason why before we didn't invalidate when it's different vessels, because a vessel doesn't invalidate. But here, when you have in mind this detail, maybe this should invalidate. And yet we say that it does not invalidate. So why doesn't it invalidate? There's no other vessel here. And the whole reason why before it was permitted was because vessels don't invalidate. Having in mind a different vessel doesn't invalidate. But here, you're having in mind putting oil in, and yet it says it's good. So Amarle, no, Lishum Bila Be'alma. He's not having in mind he's going to mix it with oil. He's having in mind it's going to be mixed. So even though he has it, he says, I'm going to be mixing it. And usually mixing means mixing with oil. But here he says, I'm having in mind, I'm just mixing in general, not necessarily with oil. Says the Gemara, if you can take a word that usually means with oil and say it means mixing in general, so then do the same thing by offerings. Ihachi, l'shum shlamim nami. Let's say you have an offering and you have in mind a shlamim offering. So just say, l'shum shlamim ba'alma. I don't mean to have in mind another shlamim offering. Rather, I just mean the word shlamim like the word shalom. I just have in mind to make peace between me and Hashem. But not that I have in mind a shlamim offering. So if you're going to use the word abila, which usually means with oil, and say, no, just general mixing. So then the word shlamim, when you have in mind a shlamim, you should also say, oh, it means general peace between us and Hashem. And of course, if you have in mind, let's say an ola, you're bringing an ola and you have in mind a shlamim, it should be 100% good. Because when you said shlamim, you didn't mean a shlamim, like an offering. You meant just you want to make peace between you and God. So says the Gemara, hachi hashta. That's not similar at all. Because in one case, shlamim, yes, it does mean making peace between you and God, but the Torah calls an offering a shlamim. So when you say I'm going to have in mind for a shlamim, the assumption is, the status quo is, you're having in mind for the offering shlamim, not for the peace that you want between you and God. But mixing, the word bila, is not a name of a flour offering. It's a detail that you do for some of the flour offering. So there's more leeway to understand that mixing could mean mixing in general, and not necessarily mixing with oil. So that's going to be the Gemara's rebuttal. So it says the Gemara, Hachi hashta hasam zevach gufa ikri shlamim dichsiv avachri v'stama shlamim. The Torah itself calls the sacrifice a shlamim, as it says, one who brings the blood of a shlamim, hazorik as dama shlamim, one who applies the blood of a shlamim. So you see, the Torah clearly calls it a shlamim. But a hacha mincha gufa miikri blua. You ever find a flour offering called mixed? It's not called mixed. It's called mincha blula b'shem iksiv. It says when you mix it with oil. Blula b'shem and ikri, but blula stamalo ikri. So mixing, you have to say mixing with oil. Then, but just to say mixing can mean mixing in general, and not necessarily assume to mean with oil. Okay. So now, 3 reconciliations to the internal difficulty of the Rav Shimons. So the Gemara is going to go through each one, why the other ones didn't learn like that one. So, Kulhu Kiraba, the first answer was when your actions show us clearly your intention, that will not be an invalidation. So, Kulu, so why didn't Rabba and Rav Ashi learn like Rabba? Kulu Rabba Amri, the other Rabba, Makshava de Minkra, Pasar Rachmana. Because they held that in action, which is obvious, which obviously is not what you had in mind. So, right, if you're putting something in a regular pan, you had in mind to bring it, you had in mind a deep frying pan, but we see your actions clearly go against your thought process, your intentions. That doesn't matter. They held that that's still going to be an invalidation. Such a clear action against your thoughts, that will be an invalidation. Now, Rava was the one that said, Zos Torah Samincha. This is the category of the mincha, and therefore, if you have in mind any other mincha offering, it's going to be good. It's only if you have in mind when you're bringing a flower offering, if you have in mind to bring it as an animal offering, then it won't be good. So, Kirava lo amri v'zos Torah lo mashma lahu. They didn't think that the words v'zos Torah, this is the category, imply the same thing that Rava thought that it held that it implied. And Kirav Ashi, our last answer just now, lo amri mishum kusha d'Rav Acha b'rei Rava. They didn't like Rav Ashi's answer because of the difficulty that Rav Acha, the son of Rava, asked him. Yeah, which is what we just said, that Rav Acha, son of Rashi, just asked him that the dry offering for the sake of a mixed offering. That question that Rav Acha asked him was enough of a question that Rava and Rabba didn't want to go with Rav Ashi's explanation. Okay, Milsa the Rabba stunning, which was obvious to Rabba. That was our first answer. Lahai Gisa Ula Rabba Lahai Gisa, according to Rabba on the one hand, and it was also good according to Rabba on the other hand. Mi Ba'ilei the Rav Hoshia was a question for Rav Hoshia. So that which was clear to Rabba, that you're that an action which is not clearly recognizable, that goes against your thought process, is invalid. And according to Rabba, that says that a thought that's that even a thought process that is visible to everybody that goes against your thoughts is going to be invalid. So that's going to be a question that Rav Hoshia had. So what did Rav Hoshia ask? Mi bay leila Rav Hoshia. The bay Rav Hoshia. Rav Hoshia asked, Amri la bay minei Rav Hoshia me Rav Asi. Son asked, Rav Hoshia asked from Rabbi Asi the following question: Mincha l'shum zeva. Mali Amr Rav Shimon. So next page. So a mincha, which you have in mind on a flower offering, you have in mind a animal offering. So he asked that question. So time of the Rav Shimon mishum machshava de minkara lo pasla. So maybe you'll say that the reason Rav Shimon is because a machshava de minkara that's so obvious lo pasla is not going to invalidate the ha machshava de minkara. And here it's a very clear. You're continuing to bring a flower offering, and you're having in mind an animal offering, but you don't go and get an animal. You continue to bring a flower offering. So clearly, your actions show us that you intend to do a flower offering. So maybe it should not invalidate it. Or you'll say, "Oh, Dilma, time of the Rav Shimon should extiv v'zos Torah samincha v'zevach lo ksiv." Or maybe the only time it's going to be good is if you have in mind another flower offering. If you have in mind an animal offering, it's not going to be good. So exactly what was obvious to Rabba and to Rava was a question in the world of Rav Hoshia. So Amar Lei, Plum Higanu L'Sov Daitel Rav Shimon. So you think we got to the bottom of the understanding of Rav Shimon? We got to the bottom of it. Kirabba Lo Mishani Lei. He's not going to answer. He didn't like Rabba's answer because Mishum Kushi de Abaye, because the question that Abaye had on Rabba. He didn't like Rabba's answer because of the question that we had on this inference of this is the category of the chatas. And and he didn't like the answer of Rav Ashi because of the question of Rav Acha Brei Rava. So basically, if you go back to 2b, the Beis Amid Beis, when we first brought in the contradiction of Rav Shimon, and we brought in Rabba's reconciliation. So right away, Abaye had a question on Rabba. Then the top of 3b, we brought in a Rava. He gave his answer, and right away there was a question on Rava. And now we brought in the bottom of 3b Rav Ashi, and right away there's a question on Rav Ashi. So because of those three questions, that's why Rav Oshia had this question, and he didn't go with any of the answers that Rava, and Rav Ashi suggested to the questions that were asked on them. Okay. So back to our Mishnah. Two of the offerings, though, are invalid, according to our Mishnah, if you have the wrong intention. And that is a minchas chota, that is a flour offering that is brought for certain averos. If you can't afford, if you're impure in the temple and you can't afford to bring an animal, so you bring a flour offering. So that's called a minchas chota. It's a flour offering brought for a sinner. And then there's the minchas kinos, when a lady was warned and then to not seclude herself with a man and then continue to do so. So now she's what we know as a sota, but really it's actually a suffix sota. She's actually not a bona fide sota. She's in the status of a suffix sota. We treat her right now like a vada. She can't be with her husband, and then she has to bring this offering called a minchas kinaos. So both of those offerings, if you have the wrong intention, it's going to be invalid. Bishlama minchas chota. It's understandable that a minchas chota is going to be invalid because chatos kayirach mono. It calls this offering a chatos. Well, yasam lahashem and v'lo yitin lahalavona. Chatos, don't put any oil or any of the incense because it's a chatos. You see, it calls it a chatos. So, since it calls it a chatos, we're going to pattern it after. We're going to pattern it after a regular animal chatos. And the first mission is Vachim, a regular animal chatos with the wrong intention is going to be invalid. So basically, anytime it says it's a chatos, it's going to be invalid, whether you're an animal or a flour offering. But Elo, minchas kinos minon, the mincha of a sota. How do I know that that's going to be invalid? The Tani made the Rav Nachman, because we have a teaching from Rav Nachman that says, minchas kinaos mosra nedava. Let's say you spent money on a flour offering for a sota, and now you have extra money. What happens to that extra money? You put it in one of the 13 tzedakah boxes that they had, and when the altar was quiet, they would buy the sheep and put it on the altar, as an honor for the altar. So the extra money of a mincha of a minchas kinos, the flour offering of a sota, the extra money goes to the nedava, it's a gift to the temple. So now that's what someone taught to Rav Nachman. So Amar Lei Shapir Ka'amris. Now we'll see what this has to do with us. Rav Nachman responds, very well said. Why? Mascaris avon ksivbe ubechatas ksiva oson as lachem losses es avon ha'eda machatas motion nedava minchas kinos motion nedava. Just like, how do I know the leftovers of a sin offering of a sota goes as a gift to the temple? Because a regular sin offering is a gzera shava avon, and that's what happens by a regular sin offering. That's what's going to happen also by this offering. Oh, once you have a gzera shava connecting a sin offering of an animal and a sin offering to a sin offering, a flour sin offering, so then we'll say machatas psul shalishma, and then we'll say that it's gzera shava. So just like a chatas is going to be invalid if you have the wrong intentions, a sin offering of a sota is also going to be invalid if you have the wrong intention. Says if that's true, if that's true, then an ashram should also be invalid if you have the wrong intention. In a flour offering that's brought as an ashram should be invalid because the gomor of an oven mechatos. We have a gzera shava connecting an ashram to a chatos, so therefore you should connect it and say that it's going to be invalid. Says the Gemara, no. Mechatos done in avon me'avon ain't done in avono me'avon. No, there's a difference. The word by ashram is avono, his sin. The word by chatos is avon, sin. So we're not going to. That's that difference of that letter is not enough for us to connect these two sections to have a gzera shava. So on that, the Gemara says, Says Gemara, mine after mina. That one letter is not going to make a difference. And I'll prove it to you because I'll bring you an example where there's two different words that mean the same thing, and yet the words are connected for Gzeira Shava. So if the words that are different words but have the same meaning can be Gzeira Shava, the same word with an added vav can for sure be Gzeira Shava. So the classic example of where you have a different word and yet it's still Gzeira Shava is the case by tzaras. I don't like the word leprosy, so we're going to say tzaras. The word tzaras by a house. Now, when you go to tzaras, when there is tzaras in the house, the Kohen comes and sees it, and after the first week, he goes back and he sees it. And he goes, "Oh, yep, this is tzaras," and you have to plaster away the house and take down the stones, etc., etc. So now, that's when he comes the first time. But then what happens is later on the tzaras comes back. The Kohen goes to check it out again, and then he declares it to be a house of tzaras. Now there, the second time he comes back, meaning after it already had tzaras, and they took down the plaster and the stones and everything it says in that section. If the tzaras comes back, the Kohen goes back to the house, declares it tzaras, but there it doesn't say anything about taking down the stones and the plaster. It doesn't mention that at all. How do you know when it comes back, you have to do all that? A Gzeira Shava. What is that Gzeira Shava? It says in the 14th chapter of Vayikra, in the 39th verse, Vishav HaKohen, the Kohen returns and goes into the house and sees it. And that's where it says that he declares Zaras, you have to, go destroy the house, take down the bricks and plaster and everything. And then it says, Ubah HaKohen. 5 verses later, it's talking about the Tzaras returning. And there it says, Ubah HaKohen. So we learn, Zuhi Shiva, Zuhi Bia, just like the Kohen. The first time when he came and had to declare the Tzaras, he had to do all these things to the house, Zuhi Bia. So too when he comes, that word is a different word. It means to come. And the first meant to return. But they both mean to go into the house. So yeah, we see that you can have a Gzeira Shava, even if the words are different. So for sure, if the letter is different, so that's not a rebuttal. And therefore, we should still have a Gzeira Shava from a chatas to an asham to teach you that if you have a wrong intention by a flour asham, it's going to be invalid. And yet we don't say that. That's 1. 2. The Od Ligmar Avono may avon the Shmi Haskol. The Shmi Haskol, the Ksivin Lo Yagivin Asavona. If there's testimony that you know about and you don't come testify, so you're a sinner. Now, the word that's used there is avono. So you have, even by a chatos, you have the word avono. So first of all, that which you said, that you cannot learn an asham from a chatos because it has avon and avono, is incorrect on 2 accounts. First of all, that one letter doesn't make a difference because we have a case where the different words and it's still Gzeira Shava. And number 2 is, even in the section of a chatos, it says avono. So that's rejected. Ella, when did we learn the Gzeira Shava? That was only from chatas to chatas. She gamri Gzeira Shava l'moser and the double who the gamri. It was only for one thing. You learned the Gzeira Shava only for one thing, that you cannot bring any extra money for a sin offering, an animal sin offering, or any extra money for the sin offering, a flour sin offering. The extra money goes to a gift to the temple. But you cannot learn anything more from there. You cannot learn that if you have a wrong intention, that's going to be invalid. So now, says the Gemara, hold on. You can't split a Gzeira Shava in half. It doesn't work that way. It's connected fully. The Chitema ain't Gzeira Shava l'mechza. You can't do Gzeira Shava halfway. You can't do halvesies. So, Goli Rachmana Gave Chatos. It says only by a Chatos, the Shachar also lichatos, Osa lishma kshera, shelo lishma psula. It says specifically by a chatas, it has to be for a chatas. Meaning, it has to be for the sake of a chatas and not for the sake of anything else. But every other sacrifice doesn't have that exposition, and therefore it's going to be valid. So, Ella, we're back to the drawing board. How do you know that a sin offering, a flour sin offering, and a sin offering and a flour offering of a sota, if you have the wrong intention in mind, are going to be invalid? Ella minchas chod minchas kinos the psul and shol shman minolan. How do I know So chatas time of my, why is the chatas invalid? Mishum d'ksiv bahi. It says he, that this has to be for a chatas, and that's it. So that was by an animal chatas. Achanami hafsiv bahu he. So to buy a flower chatos, by a flower sin offering, it says he. It says he. It has to be for a chatos, and it can't be for anything else. Says the Gemara, okay, but an asham nami hafsiv behu. It says it. It has to be only for an asham and nothing else. Shouldn't you have the same exposition? It says no, because where's that who mentioned? That who is mentioned at a non-primary part of the procedures of bringing a sacrifice. It's mentioned who, but who is la'achar haktar seimurin hu diksif. It only mentioned after you brought the sacrificial limbs. Things brought after the sacrificial parts are done, that's not a primary part of the service. We need something before the throwing of the blood. Throwing the blood is the primary part of the service. Even though it says who, and we'll see what it's used for, but it can't be coming to invalidate if you have the wrong intention. Because after those parts are brought already, you're already at the less essential parts of the service. As the Brisa says, it only says who. It has to remain in some kind of state, but it only says it after you already sacrificed you offered up the sacrificial limbs of the asham offering. So who atzmo shelo hukteru emurin kosher. The animal, even if you didn't bring up those extra sacrificial parts, the offering is still a kosher offering. Okay, if that's true, Elahu lamali. So what is who doing then? For Rav Huna Marav, who says kosher, you have an asham that has to go graze. It's one of the offerings. Let's say you lost it, and then the owners had to make a new one, and they got atoned for, and you found the first one. Oh, so you found the first one. So now, if you found the first one, it's now designated to go graze until it gets a blemish. And now you go and you shecht it. V'shachtu stam kasher l'shum ola. Nitak in, lo nitak lo. So now, you have two offerings. So you have an asham offering you designated. It got lost. So you replaced it with another offering. So now, that second offering, you went and you atoned for your avera. Fine. But now you found the first offering. So what do you have to do? It has to go graze. So now, if you go and slaughter it, at some point, it's going to be considered an ola. So now the question is, at what point does it switch over from an asham to an ola? So that pivotal point is once it's given over to the shepherd to graze. If you then slaughter it, it's going to be considered an ola. But if until you gave it to the shepherd to graze, so it's still an asham. So slaughtering that asham is invalid. That's not a good asham. And it won't be an ola either. That's what it means, who. Who, it's going to remain in its state. It's going to remain in asham until you uproot it from being an asham. How do you uproot it? By giving it over to the shepherd. Okay. Continuing. We know that on the second day of Pesach, you bring another flour offering called the Minchas HaOmer to allow the new grain to be used. So, Omer Rav, Minchas HaOmer should come to Sholashim Psula. So Rav's statement is, if you do kmitza on a Minchas HaOmer, but you have the wrong intention, it's going to be invalid. What's the reasoning? And the whole thing was, it came to permit the new grain, and it didn't do that. Now, so we're saying now, anything which is, we'll see, anything which is coming to permit, if you have the wrong intention, it's not going to go. So the Chain Ata Omer Ba'asham Nazir, turn the page, and Asham Metzora. Another two examples of offerings that are brought to permit is a Nazir. You bring the offering, he's now permitted to have everything he used to have, wine, and then and purify himself to dead people, to that impurity. The Asham Metzora. A Metzora, once you bring it, now you're permitted to come back, and you're not impure anymore. So those two, since they came to permit and they didn't permit, the three offerings that come to permit, a Minchas Omer and Asham Nazir and Asham Metzora, those two that are coming to permit, and if they don't do their job, then it didn't work. They're invalid. So now let's see if this is true and how does this fit with our Mishnah. We only have two exceptions that are invalid if you have the wrong intention: a sin offering and a sota offering. But everything else is good. So you just told me three more cases that are not good. So how does that fit with our Mishnah? If you're right, Rav, so listinami chutz minchas omer. The Mishnah should say not only is a minchas chot and a minchas kinaos, those offerings are not good. Sorry if you have the wrong intention, but also a minchas omer is also not going to be good. So says the Gemara, kikatani ba yachid ba tzibur lokatani. We're talking about only private offerings. Rav says to defend himself in our Mishnah, only private offerings and not public offerings. So sorry, he was talking about only private offerings. No, he was talking. The Mishnah was talking about private offerings, and he was talking about minchas omer is a public offering, and therefore it didn't mention. Okay, hikatani ba b'glal atzma, but ba b'glal zevach lokatani. The Mishnah only mentioned offerings that were brought on their own, but the minchas omer is brought with an animal offering, so that was not mentioned. And kikatani hana shein kabul lehen zman hakad kabul zman lokatani. The Mishnah was talking about things that don't have a set time, but like a sin offering, you bring whenever you do an avera. However, or the sota, whenever she's taught to be a sota. I was talking about things that have a set time, like every year, second day of Pesach, you got to bring this offering. So three differences between a minchas omer, Rav's case of a minchas omer, that you have the wrong intention, it's going to be invalid, and the other two cases in our Mishnah that are also invalid with the wrong intention, they have these three differences, and therefore Rav felt that, and therefore Rav held that it's not a problem, it's not a difficulty that is not mentioned in our Mishnah, because our Mishnah was talking about with sacrifices with certain specifications, and he was talking about sacrifices with other specifications. But that's only good for a minchas omer. What about your other two? Omer mar v'chan omer asham nazir v'asham mitzora. What about those two? The asham nazir and the asham mitzora, to permit the nazir to go back to regular life and to permit the mitzora to go back to regular life. Sheshaktan shelo l'shman sulin hoel ubo lahakshiv lo hikshiru. Since they came to permit and they didn't permit, it's going to be invalid. So now, how does that fit with our Mishnah? So Tanat, it says, Kol hazvachim sheshaktan shaloshman sherin. So back to the first page of Zvachim. Dav Beis, it says all the animal offerings that are slaughtered for the wrong reasons are going to be kosher. However, they're not going to be good for as the owner's obligation. L'shum chova. So it's still good offering, but it's not going to suffice for the owner's obligation, except for two. Chutz mi Pesach v'chatas. The Pesach offering and the chatas offering were two that if you have the wrong intention, they are going to be invalid. Says the Gemara, hold on. If you're right that these offerings that are coming to permit, if you have the wrong intention, are going to be invalid, so these offerings are coming to permit. It didn't permit. So what do you call it? So therefore, they should be mentioned in that Mishnah, and yet they're not mentioned in that Mishnah. So that's a question on Rav. So says the Gemara, says the Gemara that, listen, we're talking about asham, guilt offerings. So you're right. These two really should be in the Mishnah. But the problem is you have other asham offerings that are not coming to permit, they're coming to atone. So therefore, in those offerings, if you have the wrong intention, they will be kosher. So we didn't want to, since some ashams have one halacha and other ashams have other halachas, we didn't want to mention only some of the ashams because it's not a clear-cut rule around amongst all the ashams. So achatas was a clear-cut rule. All the chatas offerings, if you have the wrong intention, it's going to be invalid. So really, it's not a question on Rav. Really, you're right. These two, if you have the wrong intention, will be invalid. The Mishnah wanted to be a clear-cut cases. Chatas is clear-cut. Asham is not clear-cut. Some come for atonement and some come for permitting. Okay. Now, at the end of the day, what kind of logic is this? That because it's coming to permit and therefore if it's coming to permit and you have the wrong intention, it doesn't permit you to not be a nazir anymore, to drink your wine and not be a mitzvah anymore and come back to society. So what does that mean? The other offerings are coming to atone. If you have the wrong intention, then they should atone. Then they don't atone for you either, and they should be invalid. So what kind of logic is this? That if it doesn't, since it's coming to permit, if you have the wrong intention, it's not going to permit. Okay, if you're coming to atone and you have the wrong intention, then it shouldn't atone either. And yet that's not true. So what's the difference? So things that are coming to atone and don't atone for you, but if you have the wrong intention, there's still a valid offering. You can still bring it up on the altar. So Amr of Yirmiyah, Matzinu Shechilek Hakaso bein Mechaprin ubein Makshirin. Mechaprin is Dasul Achar Misa. Makshirin less Dasul Achar Misa. So we find the Torah itself, we're going to see in a second, makes a difference between the ones that permit things and the ones that atone. The ones that permit, so you cannot bring after death. The ones that atone, you could. So you see that they're more strict. Since they're more strict in that area, it's logical that they're more strict in our area also. Where do we find this? So every woman who gives birth has to bring a number of sacrifices. So now, her sacrifices, so interestingly enough, her chata sacrifice is actually coming to permit her to eat sacrificial offerings, to eat kachim. And then it sounds like by way of inference, her ola offering is actually coming to atone. So for our case, and it's a little bit counterintuitive, but the chatas is coming to permit and the ola is coming to atone. And now she designates the offering and dies. She designates her offering, she gives birth, and then she dies. So what happens? The Yorshim, her and her children will bring, the inheritors will bring what? They'll bring an ola. But if she has an ola to bring and she dies, they're not going to bring a chatas. So the chatas that's coming to permit, they don't bring after death. The ola that's coming to atone, they do bring after death. So too, you find such a discrepancy between permitters and atoners. So too, we're going to have a difference also between permitters and atoners. No, not tomorrow. Oh, okay. So that's that. Now, Maskif Lo Rabbi Yehuda Breder Shimon ben Pazi says that, hold on, Machshirin Nami Milespu the Asulachar Misa. We're going to bring you a case now of an atoner that is going to come after death. What's that? So this case of a nazir, where he separates his money to, for his offerings, he's going to bring when he finishes his nazirus, his nazirus process. So now, the money he sets away, lo nanin, so you cannot benefit from them. However, below molin, but there's no me'ila, because they could be fit to be brought as a shlamim, and by a shlamim, there's no me'ila because it's a lower level sanctity sacrifice. So, yeah, now, okay, that's that. So now, mace, if he dies and money was set away, so now it depends. If it's v'hayulo ma'us stumin, meaning the monies were supposed to be anonymous, meaning he didn't designate them for must be for my chatas or must be for my shlamim or must be for my asham. He didn't designate which one of the offerings he has to bring 3 offerings at the end. He didn't designate for which one it's going for. Just stop, just anonymous, just regular money set away for my offerings. So, and then he dies. Yiplu lin double. That's going to go to those gift offerings to the temple that when it's quiet, you're going to bring offerings up. Okay, fine. But now, mifuroshin, if he explicitly states this money should be for a chatos, for his chatos that he has to bring when he finishes his Nazareth process. So what happens? Then he dies. Yolich liyam hamelach. So that money is like a regular chatos whose owners died. The animal goes to death. It has to graze and die. So too, the money has to be thrown into the Yam HaMelech. You can't do anything with the money. So that's lo nanin, v'lo molin. You can't benefit from them rabbinically, but there's no me'ila. There's no me'ila. Fine. Now, demei ola. He specified that I want the money to go for my ola offering. and he dies. So Yavi Behen Ola, you bring with that money in Ola offering. And there will be Me'ila because Ola is a holier sacrifice, and there is Me'ila by that. If he specifies he's going to be for a Shlomim, Demei Shlomim, so Yavi Behen Shlomim, you'll bring the animal offering for him. Yavi Behen Shlomim, V'necholin L'yom Echad, and you'll eat it in one day. The Ein Tun and Lechem, it's not going to need bread with it. Fine. That's a special rules by the case where a Nazir dies and the money is specified. Now, we just said that an Ola and a Shlomim will be brought after he dies. But how could that be? Ola v'Shlomim, the Nazir, the Machshirim Ninhu. Those are part of his permissibility process to let him go back to being permitted in everything that he was prohibited in. So, the Ka'asu Lachar Misa. So what do you see? You have offerings that allow you to go back to your to being regular, not a Nazir anymore, and yet you bring it even after death. So by a lady who gives birth, you don't, but you found a case that even the things that permit you to do things are still brought after death, and therefore you don't have that stringency like we thought, and therefore if you have the wrong intention, it should still be a valid sacrifice. So that's the question. Amar of Papa, Halchika Amar of Yirmiyah. This is what Rav Yirmiyah was saying. When Rav Yirmiyah said that we found that the Torah itself, the halacha itself, differentiates between permitters and atoners, he meant like this. Amar of Yirmiyah, lo matzinu hechsher kavua debal la'achar misa. Udenazir hechsher she'ena kavua. We never found when there is a set offering. When there's a set offering, set offering here means where this is the only thing that's going to permit you to do what you have to do. So in this case, you have a number, we'll see in a second, you have a number of offerings you bring at the end of the Nazir's process. If you bring any of them, any one of them, you're allowed to shave again. So when he said that we differentiated between the permitters and the atoners, he was only talking about things that were kavua, that this was the offering that you need to be able to permit yourself. Like the Yoledes, she needs that chatas offering to permit her to eat the kachim. There's no other offering that she has that can allow her to do that. As opposed to a nazir, where any one of the three offerings you bring will permit you to shave, as we find. The next page. If you shave after any one of the three offerings you bring at the end of the Nazir's process, so then you are going to yotze, meaning that's going to be good enough, and one of those three will allow you to shave. So that's called Eina Kavua. That's not Kavua, and therefore we still stay strong that there still is a difference between the permitters and the atoners, because really any permitter, which is set, which is the only thing that permits it, we don't find that after death you could still bring it. Therefore, we see it's more stringent. So therefore, it'll be more stringent in this area as well. Says the Gemara, Meisei, Asham Mitzorah, the Asham of Mitzorah, Shenishkash Lo Shmo, that you bring it, the Asham of Mitzorah, and you slaughter it for the wrong intentions. Oh, Shalonidim Midel Agabe Behonos, or you didn't put from the blood onto his onto the forefinger, onto the toe. Hareza Ola Legabe Mizbeach, V'to Nesachim, V'tzarech Asham Acher Lachshiro. So you have an Asham Mitzorah, and you had the wrong intentions. What happens? In itself, you can put onto the altar. You'll have to bring another asham. But what do you see? You see an asham mitzorah, which Rav said a minchas omer, and then an asham mitzorah are things that if you have the wrong intention, it's going to be invalid, totally invalid. What we see here, it's not true. An asham mitzorah is something which is going to be, even if you have the wrong intentions, it'll still be a valid sacrifice. You can still put on the altar. You'll have to bring another one for the owner as part of his mitzorah process. Yeah. Okay, we'll stop here.
Ashakov and Shabbos.